Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second live listening session for the Tabasco episode. Today, we have celebrity chef Nini Nguyen. She is Vietnamese from New Orleans, and I have never talked to a top chef before. She was a top contender on the show Top Chef, Bravo's Top Chef, and I'm so excited to have her. Nini, if you would like to introduce yourself and any cool things that you're doing right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nini Nguyen, and one of them, I have like a multitude of things that I'm always like dipping my hands in, but my main thing right now is working on a cookbook. It's called Doc Viet. It's a Vietnamese cookbook that really shows the perspective of someone who grew up in the Gulf Coast that's Vietnamese.
Amazing, which is so fitting for this episode because Tabasco sauce, I recently found out, comes from a lot of different places. So in our podcast, we travel from Ireland all the way to New Orleans, and Nini was highly requested to be on the show as like a New Orleans chef. So I'm excited for her to hear it, and we'll see what she has to say at the end.
Yeah, and I guess before we listen to the episode, Nini, I'd like to hear what's your immediate thoughts on or opinion of Tabasco sauce? What is your experience with it?
I think Tabasco is one of the most iconic hot sauces in America. It's dated, it's like old school. When I think of Tabasco sauce, I think of eating it with oysters, with lemon. And I think that is extremely classic. In Louisiana, we have so many different hot sauces, which is really cool because like we have like, everyone has the one that they do and or use all the time. But I just think it's so iconic. If you're from Louisiana, you should go to Avery Island and check it out. And there's so much history. And though I don't use it all the time, there's like certain applications that I use it for. And it's, I don't know, I think it's really cool. And I think it's cool that it comes from a place that I'm from.
Awesome. Perfect. So I think we can get started.
Some astronaut was probably like, this food tastes really bad. Can I get some hot sauce? Hi, this is Kiona.
And this is Luis.
And we're your hosts of How Not to Travel Podcast Season 3.
Fasten your seatbelts and take your seat at the table.
In this season, we're traveling around the world from our dinner tables to see how cultural exchange contributed to some of the world's most famous foods.
This week, Tabasco sauce.
Isn't Tabasco sauce technically Mexican?
Well, that's the question to start this episode about Tabasco sauce.
I mean, I guess for me, like, Tabasco sounds Mexican. And I know that there's a state in Mexico called Tabasco. So, I mean, it's Mexican, right?
You're right. Tabasco is a state in Mexico. And that's basically the end of where the Mexican element of Tabasco comes from. So
it's not Mexican.
It's not Mexican. No, it's technically a very little bit Mexican.
It sounds Mexican. It's spicy, which is usually what I associate with Mexico. It's sold like a Mexican sauce. It's in the Hispanic ethnic foods section of the supermarket.
Yes, and despite all of that, it's still not actually Mexican.
Okay, so tell me the story. Where is it from?
Do you want to take a shot at where you might think it's from?
I actually kind of think I know where it's from. So one time I went to visit a plantation in Louisiana, and it was called the Whitney Plantation. And there they told me that they hold claim to the Tabasco sauce, but that actually it was used as medicine that was prepared by an enslaved woman for her slave master to cure him of illnesses. But I don't know if that's true, if that's like an urban myth. Like, I have done no research.
Wow, I had never heard about that specific myth, but it is American and it is from Louisiana. And it's not even made by some Mexican person who moved to Louisiana, who started living there. It was actually made by an Irish guy. So he's an Irish American man. His name is Edmund McIlhenny. And he invented this sauce just a little over 150 years ago,
Dang.
1868. So 1868, Louisiana, southern United States, post-Civil War. And so in this context is where Edmund McIlhenny invents Tabasco sauce. And he does it in Avery Island, which is in Louisiana.
Never been.
Neither have I, but it's still the place where all Tabasco sauce is made. It's also its headquarters, where every single Tabasco sauce is bottled and distributed worldwide.
Okay, so you're telling me that an Irish American person got to an island in Louisiana somehow and they decided to create hot sauce. Like there has to be a story there. Like how did that happen?
So Edmund McIlhenny, right? Irish American, 1868. If you look at a picture of him or a portrait of him,
Abraham Lincoln vibes for sure.
and when I told you it was just a tiny, tiny bit Mexican, this is because this man, Edmund McIlhenny, was once gifted these very special little peppers called Tabasco peppers. These are very small, kind of sweet-ish peppers, and he was given the peppers and given seeds. So he planted these peppers on Avery Island. So technically, the very first peppers that he tried and that gave him the idea to do this were probably from Mexico. We don't even exactly know that for sure. It might have been, for example, from another Central American country. But the name of the pepper is Tabasco peppers. And the peppers are named after the state of Tabasco, but there's really no way to know if the peppers that he got were actually grown and transported from Tabasco.
Do we know who gave it to him?
I don't know exactly who gave it to him, but I think it's also good to mention from the beginning that Tabasco, it's a brand, it's a company, and it's a company that has continuously made Tabasco sauce in the very same place for 150 years. What's interesting about this is that they have documented their story quite well for marketing purposes. So we can definitely read a lot about the history of Tabasco from the Tabasco Sauce website. The problem with that is that, of course, there are always going to be details that are curated by the brand itself. So, like, there's little way to know, to do other research and, like, try to see other details that the brand themselves won't disclose or won't share.
Right, totally. So it really could have been like an enslaved woman who brought her peppers with her. It could have been a soldier coming back from the Mexican-American War. Could have been literally anyone. It's funny how they just conveniently were like, he was gifted these peppers, but by who?
And then, like, he decided to plant them, and that is where it all started. And then he decided to start experimenting and making the sauce. Kiana, do you happen to know how many ingredients there are in Tabasco sauce?
Like peppers and vinegar, too?
And one more, salt.
Huh.
But peppers and vinegar are correct. One also might imagine that a sauce like Tabasco would have like several ingredients and like food colorings and other chemicals. But no, it's just those three, and it's always been that way since the beginning.
Did you know that Tabasco sauce isn't the only ingredient that every island is famous for? In fact, before the Tabasco company set up shop there, it was well known and coveted for something else: salt. Edmund McIlhenny's famous first peppers may have come to him from far away. But to get another one of his key ingredients for Tabasco, he didn't have to leave the island. It turns out the place actually sits above a huge salt dome. And during the Civil War, the Confederate and Union armies fought over it for this very reason. Salt mining continues to be an essential industrial activity here. So how did he come up with this secret special makeup of these three ingredients for it to taste so bomb?
He started experimenting by crushing Tabasco peppers and adding salt. And then he added white wine vinegar. And that is basically the recipe that we know today. He even originally made the first few batches of the sauce in perfume bottles. So picture like, I kind of picture like this very homemade, very DIY procedure.
And just putting it in perfume bottles. I guess that makes sense because it looks like you could like spray.
And I think that's also why the bottle kind of looks like that. today, which, by the way, is also an interesting point. The Tabasco logo, if you look at it, it has a very vintage look to it because it basically hasn't changed. There were a couple of iterations of the logo at the very beginning, but this one has been around for definitely more than a century. What's interesting here is that the product itself also tells us a lot of information. I don't know if you want to like read the logo.
I guess it says like McIlhenny Company. So it is, I mean, that is a very Irish name. I never would have noticed that before. I literally just noticed Tabasco and I thought immediately Mexican. But literally the Irish part is slapped on it too. And not only that, it says Avery Island, Louisiana. So, I mean, it definitely refers to the spicy island that he grows all of these on.
Most people might just look at the word in the middle, Tabasco, and maybe even salsa picante. Well, this one is in Spanish because we bought it in Mexico, of course, but I'm sure it's different in every language. But basically, it should say something like Tabasco hot sauce. But then if you look at the other details, you can see the name of McIlhenny and Avery Island.
Oh, dang. Look at the back of this bottle. Read this.
Datos picantes. Okay, this is interesting. It says, Tabasco sauce was present during the excavation of the tomb of Tutankhamun, the Egyptian pharaoh.
So basically, all the way to Egypt at the tomb of King Tut. So Tabasco has traveled way more than I have.
And what's interesting is that it hasn't changed basically at all. So I wanted to go in a little deeper on how it's made because we already went through the ingredients, right? It has peppers, salt, and vinegar. But originally, all the peppers were grown and harvested in Avery Island. But because they became much more successful and there was much more demand for it, they needed to plant the peppers in other places, right? So they decided to start growing them in Mexico, in Central America, South America, and in some parts of Africa. But then they all get shipped back to Avery Island, which is to this day still the only place that basically makes the mixture of the sauce and bottles and distributes it.
Did you know that Tabasco peppers are harvested when they've turned a very specific shade of red? Since it only has 3 ingredients, Tabasco sauce has no food coloring, yet it always has the same shade of bright red. And this is because harvesters use a tiny red stick painted with a specific color and compare the peppers with it. Peppers should never be too green or too mature to be added to the sauce. This little stick, which is just a little shorter than the regular bottle of Tabasco sauce, is affectionately called Le Petit Bâton Rouge, and you can actually buy your own on the Tabasco website.
But before the bottling and distribution, there is also one key step.
What was that?
It has to age, kind of like wine. Basically, it ages in wooden barrels for 3 years.
3 years? That's a long time to have like a return on product.
Historically, there have been moments where, because of certain climate situations, natural disasters, and that sort of thing, the peppers that they grow in different parts of the world, they don't have a good season sometimes. And so the problem with that is that down the line, they have scarcity later, right? That is actually one of the reasons why they started growing them in other places to control for that.
That is so smart. So they're like, okay, if one location goes down, at least we have these other locations so that supply chain doesn't stop. I guess the salt and the vinegar is, yes, it adds to the taste, but it also is preserving the pepper inside.
And that's, I think, the key to its success in many ways. It's a simple sauce. It's easy to make. It's only 3 ingredients, but it's also made to last.
Yeah, and I guess that's why it hasn't changed in 150 years. Tabasco is like a flavor that I can always count on.
Yeah.
Whereas like, homemade salsa is variable. Like the salsa in one restaurant is not going to be the same salsa as the next restaurant.
I'm glad you brought that up because basically Tabasco is actually not originally, or at least not entirely meant to be eaten on its own. At least historically, the way to use Tabasco was often marketed more as a way to add flavor to your dishes or to your meals, So rather than like having it directly on chips or something like that, you would add, and this is interesting, there's a lot of beautiful vintage ads of Tabasco sauce from like the 1950s that basically said something like, just add a few drops and you'll spice things up with your casseroles or with your spam dishes or with so many different dishes. There's actually this quote that I love from this Tabasco skinny dip recipe ad, which is interesting because Tabasco heavily marketed itself through recipes. So like they have a lot of recipe books. All of them include Tabasco sauce, of course. So this particular recipe ad says, and I just love this. This is from 1973, and it reads like it, right? Would you like to read it?
It says, "Dip witches, sandwich spreads you make with dips. Don't yawn your way through another summer sandwich. Get with these exciting new spreads you make yourself. Take a package of Fritos brand green onion, taco, or bean dip, blend in a few goodies and a measure of Tabasco brand pepper sauce made from a family recipe watched over for more than 100 years, and presto, Mom, what did you put in the sandwich? I like it." It's very cheesy, but
Yes.
I see what you're saying. Like, it's telling you exactly the type of foods that you need to put it on. It's telling you how much, and then it also is baking in the history. Like, this has been here for a long time, so you're gonna love it.
So it's like going back to that original flavor, that sort of like generations old flavor that we've all grown to love. Basically, Tabasco was able to brand itself in such a way that it became a staple for astronauts in space stations and in the military. Both the military meals ready to eat and the food that you can take to space has very strict requirements of how it should be packaged and dried and prepared to avoid any sort of spoiling, and of course, in the case of the space station, to avoid any sort of like breadcrumbs or anything that could, tamper with any sort of machinery up there.
Isn't there like special packaging or you have to like dry
Exactly.
the liquid or something?
Despite all of that, Tabasco is actually in astronaut food.
I
And
feel
NASA.
like it was some astronaut was probably like, this food tastes really bad. Can I get some hot sauce?
Yeah.
That's what I think happened.
Exactly.
But why do you think they chose Tabasco?
Everyone knows it, and it's such a well-known brand that
Yeah.
it had the reputation.
Did you know that Tabasco is in more countries than McDonald's? The sauce is available in 185 countries worldwide, compared to only 119 countries where you could get a Big Mac. It was already available in Europe, Asia, and Africa before the end of the 19th century and is a favorite of the British monarchy. The Queen Mother is said to have enjoyed Tabasco so much she sent her staff all over London to purchase it. And in 2009, Queen Elizabeth II awarded the company a royal warrant.
Despite the fact that the sauce is aged in barrels like wine, it has something very different from wine, which is that it's always made to be exactly the same, right? Like with wine, when you age it, of course, like every year it's slightly different because of differences in temperature and soil, and even the same wine in different years will, of course, taste differently, right?
Right.
Whereas with Tabasco sauce, it's always meant to be exactly the same, which I find it really interesting. It's like consistent all the time.
Yeah, but also I've seen other flavors of Tabasco, like green jalapeno, chipotle, habanero, sriracha, buffalo. Like, what about those things?
I'm glad you brought that up because the original Tabasco sauce, of course, dates back to 1868, but then the Tabasco brand eventually decided to experiment with other flavors. So then they added green jalapeno, they added habanero, they added buffalo wing sauce, garlic, sriracha sauce. And so now, of course, you see all of these different kinds of sauces in the Tabasco line of products. And that's basically just a way that they diversified their products, right?
Yeah.
But their biggest seller is, of course, still their original recipe.
Interesting.
Did you know that Tabasco once inspired an opera?
An entire opera about this hot sauce.
And I love the little history behind it. It's called the Burlesque Opera of Tabasco. It's called burlesque because in that era, that word referred to a comedic parody, often of an opera.
Okay, so it wasn't like Moulin Rouge with like women dancing around.
Yeah, not really like a cabaret style, but sort of like a light operetta sort of thing. Definitely meant to be a comedy and something to be lighthearted.
My way, and Tabasco soul is going to stay. What is happening, my lord? For I strike something not.
Okay, so but what's the plot?
The synopsis of the opera starts in Tangier, Morocco,
Oh, interesting.
in the late 1800s. So there are some sea traders who arrive in Tangier and they comment on their hopes of finding a little romance in this, quote, exotic country. And then, they're talking about what they traded that day. But then what's interesting is that the Tabasco sauce literally saves the day.
Wait, how?
These guys get into some shenanigans, right? And just in the nick of time, they arrive with a boat with crates of Tabasco. And it had been docked in the port of Tangier. And in his delight, the Pasha, which is like the Sultan of Spicy, basically agrees to pardon someone for something he did. Again, like this is a whole story, of course, but basically Tabasco saves the day because it arrives in the nick of time for the Sultan to forgive someone for something that he did.
Because he liked the Tabasco, like he tried it and was like, you know what? You're
Yes.
fine.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. I would love to give Tabasco to my boss and be like, sorry I made this mistake, but here's some Tabasco.
Yeah.
So did McIlhenny know about this opera, and does he know that his, famous Tabasco has made it to, I guess, the big stage?
Basically, a Boston volunteer militia commissioned a composer and a librettist to create the opera as a fundraiser for the new armory. And then because they intended to perform the opera commercially, he required the permission of the McIlhenny Company to use the trademark to be able to actually name it the Burlesque Opera of Tabasco. And the McIlhenny Company agreed, but as part of its approval, they had a couple of conditions.
Ooh, what are they?
So one of them was, and I absolutely love this, one of the conditions required them to pass out samples of Tabasco sauce during the productions.
Stop. Like during the performance, they were passing out Tabasco sauce.
Yes, exactly.
This is like Oprah, like you get a Tabasco sauce,
Yes.
you get a Tabasco sauce.
Yeah, it's just so much fun. I love the idea of going to an opera and also having Tabasco sauce at the same time. It's so weird.
Yes, like the juxtaposition of hot sauce and opera is not something that I would ever thought about. Like the only operas I've been to are in Vienna, where my grandfather took me and I like fell asleep halfway through because I was like, they sing in Italian or German and it's
Yeah.
like I don't know anything that's going on and I'm half asleep. But if there was Tabasco or some hot sauce, like it'd probably keep me awake.
And if the sauce that you're eating doesn't keep you awake, then maybe the giant paper mache Tabasco sauce bottle that appears on stage during the performance might actually do that.
Wait. So they brought basically a Tabasco piñata on stage.
Yes, exactly.
Going back to its non-Mexican roots, but Mexican roots.
Yeah.
They brought a Tabasco piñata on stage. And yeah, that would definitely have kept me awake for sure.
I just love this so much. It's so literally on brand.
So let's get this straight. The chili pepper traveled to New Orleans. We're not really sure where exactly the chili pepper came from. Possibly Central America, possibly Mexico, maybe Tabasco, but maybe not.
Yes.
And it gets to New Orleans and it arrives in this man's hand and he takes it to an island where he grows it.
Yes.
But then from there, he grows it all over the world just in case like something happens to his crop and he has like backup.
Exactly. Yes.
And then it travels to outer space.
Yes.
So this is the tale of the traveling Tabasco sauce. It's definitely gone places that no man has gone before.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I have a serious question.
Yeah.
I just want to say that Mexicans have a very high tolerance for spice, which is one of the things I admire most about Mexico.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
In your Mexican opinion of this non-Mexican sauce, would you deem this spicy? Yes or no?
I would consider it spicy, yes. So there's this whole thing where like in Mexico, like you always say no pica or it's not spicy unless you're like literally tearing up and coughing, right? I don't really abide by that much because, I mean, of course, Tabasco does have a flavor and it's a good one and it does have a kick, right? A spice.
Yeah.
So it's definitely spicy. But I think even though you can actually do this with Scoville units in determining how spicy a particular sauce is, it's also true that there are different kinds of spice, right? Like it just doesn't taste the same as a Mexican sauce.
So, to conclude, Tabasco is not Mexican, guys.
It's not Mexican, but I also don't think it's necessarily wrong that people might think it is.
Yeah.
Because I've also heard from people worldwide that like they have taco night and they have tacos with Tabasco sauce, and like they just sort of immediately think of Mexico when they have the sauce.
Mm-hmm.
But even though it's not how we usually eat tacos, it's still fine, you know? It's just kind of like the product of a happy accident that ended up associating this sauce to Mexico. And it's good, even though it's not very popular in Mexico, or at least we don't eat it that way. It's just fascinating to see how it's traveled so many different places and also stood the test of time.
And that's it for this episode.
If you're still hungry for more, stick around and listen to our other episodes this season. How Not to Travel is produced by Studio 80 and hosted by Dr. Kiona and me, Luis Lopez. Our executive producer is Lori Martinez. Production and sound design by me and Chiara Sandella. Our production coordinator is Catalina H. Vélez. And our social media manager is Sofia Rodriguez. You can follow us on Instagram at How Not to Travel Pod and at 80 Podcasts. You can also find us on Twitter at 80 Podcasts and on TikTok at Studio 80. Read more about the show and about our other productions on our website, 80studio.com. Thanks for listening y buen provecho.
I totally forgot about like half those facts.
Yeah. Just for context, we recorded this when Queen Elizabeth was still the queen, and when we mentioned her. So it's been a while. So it's fun to hear it again.
Hey Nini, how are you doing out there?
I'm good. I changed backgrounds.
Okay.
So
let us know what. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, it was a little loud back there, so I was like, "Oh, I'll just move over here." I hope the sound is better.
It's great. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. A lot of the facts I didn't know. I didn't know that they had operas. That was really weird.
Me either.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
we absolutely love that, so we had to include it.
I'm like, whose marketing strategy was that? But I think it's really cool. I think it is amazing to see Tabasco all over the world at such like a long time ago, where I feel like, you know, exporting is not as easily or like readily available. So like wow, like how did this brand become so big across the world? And yeah, I really want to know the truth of the origin, but I think that I think it's really cool, and whatever they've done, it's like it worked. And
What do you think? What do you think is like the special sauce or the special thing about Tabasco that makes it so big? Do you feel like it's like a strategic marketing thing, like operas and influencer marketing probably now? Or do you think it's genuinely the taste?
I think it's the taste. Operas, the original influencers. But no, I think it's the taste. I think that maybe at that time there was nothing like it. And because like I feel like because New Orleans is a port city, it's like easy to get it everywhere. Like everything came in here and everything left from here. And so I think it's like a perfect timing. And being able to kind of translate to like the mass public how to use it is, I think, key whenever they did like the sandwiches or whatever. It's like because it's one thing to have like a like exotic ingredient, exotic at the time at least. I think it's another to like show people how to use it, and I think they did a really good job at that.
Yeah, that's true. I just was reading about how like Tabasco is now being advertised as a salad dressing, and they're like hiring influencers to like showcase like Tabasco sauce as a salad dressing. So it's exactly that. I feel like that's how people like how they've been getting it out there is like showing people what foods to use it on, what does it taste good, what is it used for. I wanted to ask you a question because I'm Korean and Luis is Mexican. So we both come from hot sauce, hot food background. My favorite hot sauce is actually Vietnamese. So I'm wondering, what is your favorite hot sauce? Is Tabasco included in that? And in general, like, what do you feel like hot sauce adds, like the culinary space?
So I think this is a great question. Like, I love sriracha. I'm Vietnamese, so like that's like a very like given. It's something I ate growing up, but I also ate a lot of Tabasco. I ate a lot of Crystal hot sauce. So like Louisiana style hot sauce, at least for Louisiana cooking, is something that is a key ingredient to the cooking. I didn't realize that they had music in the background. So one thing that Louisiana hot sauce gives is acidity. So a lot of times our food is very rich. It's very like it starts with the roux, which can have a good bit of fat in it. So to cut that fat, everything gets finished with either hot sauce or lemon juice. So lemon juice if you don't want it to be very spicy, hot sauce if you do want the additional spice. And I think that it's just so ingrained in our cooking. So like that is, so I really like Louisiana hot sauce. I like Crystal hot sauce and I like Tabasco. Those are my 2-3 top, like the Louisiana hot sauces, but they all play a role in different cooking. Like I guess you could kind of put sriracha on everything. That's what they say. But if I had to pick a favorite hot sauce, I'd have to be it's kind of basic of me to say, but it's sriracha. Like I think sriracha is like kind of sweet, spicy, and savory. And it adds spice. It adds a lot of flavor without a lot of heat, in my opinion, compared to a lot of other hot sauces. Like Tabasco is like very high acid, like raw vinegar, high spice, whereas like Crystal is like more mild in the vinegar, like raw vinegar taste, but more pepper flavor. So it's like they're all different ingredients.
Yeah, I feel like they're two different palettes.
Yeah.
My favorite hot sauce is actually like the Vietnamese cock sauce, or that's what I call it. I don't know what it's actually called, but I put that on all my ramen, like everything, my fried chicken. But it's so good. I do have another question. Do you feel like Tabasco is very New Orleans?
Okay, we'll wait for you to finish moving.
Sorry about that. It was
No
just so
problem.
loud out there. There's a water aerobics class that just started.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I was just like, I hope you can edit this out.
Yeah, of course.
But I do think that Tabasco is very New Orleans. Like I can see like in the early 1920s seeing oyster bars, and it's like the classic like oyster ballers, raw oysters on the half shell with a bottle of Tabasco. I think that they've done a good job at marketing to like not make it associated with just New Orleans, and I think it's more global because of that. I think it's very interesting because like when you think of like Cafe du Monde coffee, it's a New Orleans style coffee, and it does
The beignets.
and the beignets, and like you could see it like there's like a Cafe du Monde in Japan. You could find that coffee in Paris, like at Vietnamese restaurants. It's mostly like Vietnamese restaurants. There's like a whole like connection. So to see it like around the world, not being known as like a New Orleans style or Louisiana style hot sauce is very interesting. And I wonder if that is an attribute to its success.
Yeah, it's actually something that I was very curious about. And we kind of mentioned it at the end in that I think a lot of people outside of Mexico and the US think it's Mexican because of the name and because they associate something with a spicy flavor to Mexico, right? So I know that a lot of people around the world, as we mentioned in the show, use it for their taco night or use it for like to season their Mexican food, which I mean, I love. I guess there are some people who are more purist and like saying like that's not real Mexican food or real Mexican sauce or whatever. But I mean, I don't really, agree with that. Like, I think it's cool when, people experiment with different things with what they have and what they know. And I think that's great. But at the same time, it's interesting to think how it is in fact very different. Sorry, it is in fact very different, right? And so I love what you said about the acidity of the sauce, and I wanted to like go back a little bit to that because it's true. Like it's something that we actually wanted to include in the episode, but for time we couldn't really include it too much. But how Mexican salsas actually taste very different to Tabasco and to other Louisiana hot sauces and to sriracha for that matter, right? Because of the acidity kind of comes from other sources rather than from vinegar, which is a very, and at least in my experience, like not a very Mexican flavor to have like that vinegary hot sauce. I like it, but it's just very different.
Yeah, for sure. I don't always like Tabasco with everything because of the vinegar, because it's something that like I didn't grow up eating a lot of, but whenever you want that punch of like acidity, my mouth is watering just like thinking about the acidity of Tabasco. But it has a time and place. And I think that with a lot of food, especially when you think of like dips and casseroles, like a lot of those dishes lack acid. And acid really helps bring out flavor, just like salts. Like if you have an ingredient and you give it salt and some kind of acid, it makes it pop. And so it only makes sense that people started loving this condiment.
I love this conversation because now I'm just thinking of Tabasco as like vinegar with like some spice on it. I find so Cubans, I'm like 6 months in Cuba out of the year, and Cubans hate hot sauce. They hate anything hot. They don't even like pepper. But I will find Tabasco in Cuba, and like Cuba has been suffering under like US blockade for like 60 years, and like nothing gets in the country. There's barely any food, but like you definitely find Tabasco at restaurants, which I think is hilarious because somebody like from Miami or somebody's like bringing in their purse and like, displaying it. But I realize that now that you said that, I think that they like Tabasco so much because it's just vinegar. It's like not really hot sauce. It's like vinegar. And now it makes sense why Tabasco would advertise it as salad dressing, because like vinegar goes on salads. So I was like, oh my gosh, well, this is basically just a vinegar sauce that's like kind of spicy. Yeah, but I guess like now that we mentioned that, I probably wouldn't call it hot sauce now, because for me, hot sauce is like something that makes me sweat. I like clean out my sinuses. Like Tabasco doesn't really do that for me. I have a question. Do you have any special memories about Tabasco sauce?
I think for me, like one of my favorite snacks, and it's like so Louisiana, as a kid, was to take dried shrimp, because there's a huge fishing community here, and they're usually Vietnamese, and they dry shrimp. And so I would get dried shrimp and rehydrate it with Tabasco. And because it didn't have enough acid, I don't know why, I would do lemon, Tabasco, and a little bit of sugar to balance the sweet, the sour, and then the salty from the fish and the salty from the Tabasco. And it was like my favorite snack. I would like rehydrate shrimp. This sounds disgusting, but I promise you it's like the punchiest. Like I loved pickles as a kid. So think of it as like almost like a dried pickle shrimp. That was really spicy, and like I could not get enough of that. That's my weird.
No, I don't think it sounds disgusting at all. I love that.
I know. I want to try it now.
Yeah.
Also, what did you think about the fact that Tabasco has made it into space? Like it's an astronaut food, like as a staple.
I think it's really cool. I think there's a lot of things that are like in space that I kind of want to try, like the food that they have. But I think it's really cool. There's a lot of things like that NASA has like made in like history that like we still use. Like there's an ice cream machine called the Paco Jet, and it was for ice cream for like space, but like restaurants love it so much, and it's like a coveted, very expensive piece of equipment for like fine dining restaurants to use. So it's like, if Paco Jet and Tabasco are in the same league, like that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I also wanted to go back to something earlier in the conversation when you talked about New Orleans being a port city, of course, and that being key to the success, especially the early success of Tabasco and how it got to be so global before the 20th century even, right? And so I was wondering, because in the whole conversation, it never really occurred to us that could be the case, but now it seems so obvious, right? And I wonder if there's something more to say about New Orleans culture in general as being so well known, obviously being very regional, being very local to the city, but also at the same time being very well known globally. Just, you know, the New Orleans jazz scene and obviously its cuisine as well, the Cajun cuisine and all of that. I wonder if now I'm thinking about how it being a port city probably contributed very much to it being so well known outside of the city, right?
Absolutely. I think that there's so many influences here from different groups of people, and I think that we have the most like unique regional cuisine in the country, and it's amazing how like there's so much history here, how food has come about, cocktails, even like a lot of cocktails have been created in New Orleans. And it's because like everyone wanted whiskey, but then we got rum from the like Caribbean. And it's like all of this comes in, and then people come, they get off their boats, they do the thing, and then they leave and they go home and they talk about it. And so I think it is the key to why people know it so much. It is because it is, people come and people go, and people love it here and they stay. And it's just so different because of all the different influences. They're like, what is this place? Like there's something familiar for the people who come in, but then something different for them to take away. And so I think that is a big like attribute for sure.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like even the city itself is just so very different, right? I mean, of course, there's obviously the French history and the Spanish history as well, and obviously all the influences with the Caribbean countries, with Mexico, and with Asian populations as well, right? It's just become such a rich mix of history and culture that's obviously present in the cuisine as well as in everything else, right? Like I know I've been to New Orleans once and I absolutely loved it. And something that I really liked was how they have this central square with the cathedral, right? If I'm not mistaken. And so it's very different from so many other US cities in that sense, right? Like that space just feels very, for example, for me as a Mexican, I felt very much at home there because all Mexican cities, like even Mexico City, from the largest one to the smallest town, have like a central town square where the church is, right? And so that felt very, very familiar to me, you know,
Yeah.
and very different from all the other US cities that I've been to.
Yeah, I think the Spanish were here, and like the French are here, and there's like Canal Street is the neutral ground. So there's a like square on like both sides technically with a huge cathedral. But there's so many churches here. And I think and that same for Vietnam. Like there's always a square with a church that like everything else surrounds itself, and the architecture is very similar. And I think that's why like Vietnamese people really gravitated towards New Orleans in particular in the 70s when they came over, because there was so much, the climate was the same. The French were here, so like French colonialism in Vietnam, so that was very familiar. A lot of Vietnamese people did speak French, so then they felt like they could speak French here. And the industry, and just like culturally, everything is just a little bit more laid back, kind of like Vietnam.
I love that you mentioned that. I So I maybe have a more personal question. So as a Asian American, I have been working on a book on Asian American history for children because I feel like we've been wiped out pretty much everywhere. And there's a lot of, white history, Black history, even though we can always have more, but there's maybe and even Latino history, but there's not really any Asian American history anywhere. And every time I talk to somebody about food, I'm like, that's Asian, right? Like your mango is from Asia, your, whatever is like I can trace most things back to Asia. And so when I tell them that, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. I wanted to ask like and in the process of writing my book, I learned that the first Asian American settlement was actually in New Orleans, and it was in St. Malo, Louisiana. It was the Filipinos. And then I know there's like a huge wave of Vietnamese that came in and really like had like huge solidarity with the Black community in New Orleans. I'm interested to hear, and probably because I don't know, and I would like to know, what impact have Vietnamese or even like Asian in general had on the food scene in New Orleans, or just on the scene in general in New Orleans?
This is my favorite topic to talk about because this is all I really talk about. Because I think most of America doesn't know that like people like that look like me exist here and like live here and make up the fabric of the like culinary world here. I think it all starts when Vietnamese people came here in the 70s. And Vietnam is a very coastal country. So like a lot of the work that the men knew how to do was to fish. And so Vietnamese people, even if they didn't end up in New Orleans initially, found their way, communicated somehow, some way. I don't know. I'm very impressed with my grandparents to get together here and started fishing. And there was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of racism. I remember like the KKK was like very prominent, trying to scare Vietnamese people out of this industry, saying they're stealing our jobs. Which I kind of say maybe they were true, because Vietnamese people take up like 60% of the fishing industry here in the Gulf. But I think it's very important. Not only has Vietnamese people have made an impact in just like Louisiana itself, like the Gulf seafood that you get in America, it has most likely been in the hands of a Vietnamese person. I think that is very powerful. And I think that it goes so unrecognized. But when I remember my family, when they came and like in the 80s and 90s, started to get businesses or work. And I remember my aunt getting her first, like we call corner stores, which is what are like equivalent to like bodegas, but they always sell hot food. So they would sell po' boys. And just like the town square where everything's based by the church, like in my community where I grew up in New Orleans East, most of the Vietnamese people came through the Catholic Church. And so there was a church where we all kind of congregated, and it wasn't only just for like religious reasons, it was like survival. We would, I remember like my aunts and uncles, like everybody coming together, and it's like, what did we learn? Like, how did you make money? Like, how did you open the store? Oh, we learned how to make this type of food that the people here like to eat. So then, from going from the seafood industry, like they would fish, they would get the stuff, they would get crawfish, whatever, and then they would boil it, and they'd learn how to cook Creole food, because in New Orleans is more Creole, and like when you go to Lafayette, it's more Cajun. So like Avery Island, that's kind of Cajun, but Vietnamese people really learned how to cook the food of Louisiana, because that's the people that they were serving, and that was the way they could survive. They assimilated in that way. And I think that for a really long time, Vietnamese people didn't change the way that, people ate. Like we didn't like throw lemongrass and butter and all this stuff into our like crawfish until we left. So like when you see like the Cajun food, it really started in Texas when Louisiana Vietnamese people like left after Katrina, and they really built their lives there. But I think influence is a two-way street. And growing up and becoming like a young chef here, I saw so many New Orleans restaurants where there wasn't a Vietnamese chef inspired by pho, by banh mi, and by just like Vietnamese dishes using Vietnamese herbs. And this is something I still encourage all of my non-Vietnamese chef friends to do, because we have farmers in the back in like New Orleans East that like grow Vietnamese farmers that grow produce, and I want them to continue to grow the produce that I grew up eating. And so in order to do that, I need more people to buy it. And so that's kind of my initiative. And so now I feel like there's so many things that were connected. Probably going on a tangent, but there's so many things that are connected between Vietnamese food and like New Orleans food. Like we have our version of a beignet. The coffee that Vietnamese people drink is Cafe Du Monde. You go anywhere in the country and like they're gonna serve Cafe Du Monde coffee with their sweet condensed milk on ice. The bread, our banh mi bread is so similar to the bread you eat po' boys with here. And it's because it's like French influence, but we're in a hot tropical place. The bread's gonna rise a lot faster. It's gonna be a lot crustier. And so I think that there's so many similarities and influences that have both gone like both ways, that it's like almost, it's getting to about like the 50-year point where Vietnamese people have like settled here, and we're really starting to see people recognizing that like, oh, like there is an influence. And I think it all just takes time, to be honest. And I think that for a long time Vietnamese people wanted to be very respectful of this very this cuisine that is very, I think, very near and dear to a Louisiana person. Like whenever I made jambalaya on the internet, like people were like, no, like they could not fathom that like a person like me could teach someone how to make jambalaya. And the amount of like backlash that I got, there being like, she needs to go to South Louisiana and let someone teach her. And I'm like, honey, I'm from there. But it's, you know, I think it's very interesting. And I think that I think it's also very beautiful. And I can't wait for people to learn more about this.
They
Like-
tried to Creole-splain you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, honey, I'm from here and I do it better.
Yeah.
So awesome. That was so interesting and fascinating. I learned so much. I also feel like for example, Korean fried chicken was like came over during World War II, and the Black soldiers brought it over and taught Koreans how to do it. But now I'm like, okay, Korean fried chicken is like so thin and crispy. It's just like, we just do it better. I don't know what to tell you. So it just sounded like the Vietnamese, like they just do everything better, crispier, lighter. And I don't know, it was just so interesting. And I love the fact that you said that probably every single fish that comes out of the Gulf is probably touched by a Vietnamese person, because I feel like people forget about laborers. And I'm like, yeah, you know, like we're out here like struggling every day to get your food to you, and like you don't even acknowledge that like we exist.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate that you said that. And like the farmers also, like people don't understand like the whole farming history with like Asian farmers, and there's still like so many refugee farmers like Burmese, even like the Japanese who all got their farms taken away during World War II as well. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I was like hoping, I was like, I hope she says all the things, and you did. So I love that everybody's getting their Asian education today.
Yeah. No, I wanted to say too, I really love this. I had no idea of, you know, the influence that the Vietnamese population in New Orleans has had in the cuisine and in the culture. But now that you mentioned it, it makes so much sense. Of course, there's that like connection with the history with France, and it being also a coastal nation and all of that. And so yeah, I just love that. I learned so much as well. So thank you for sharing all of that. That was great.
Of course, I'm happy to share. I will talk anyone's head off about this topic, to be honest. Like I feel like it's my mission to make space for this, because I think it's very important that people recognize the work that's been done, or like the good that happens, and how food is always evolving, and how we should be open to that, like in the most respectful way. because there's a line. You don't want to do something that's offensive to someone's cuisine because it's so important to them. But I think that there's also room for creativity and to change and to embrace it. And because life would be so boring if I had to cook the same thing all the time. And I think it's great because I get to challenge my chef friends to use ingredients that I only know how to use in a certain context because that's what I've always seen it with. But to see it applied in a different way is, I think, very just as satisfying to expose people to do new things.
Yeah, I love that. And just giving like different versions of different things and you getting to try different. And like, I feel like food is like the number one thing where everybody just comes together, like whether at a table or in ingredients, or just the fact that all these ingredients traveled all around the world, like even the chili pepper traveling from Mexico somehow to Avery Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's like such a beautiful mix. And like, I think there's so much space. And I hope that you put all this history and stuff in your new cookbook coming out.
I am.
I'm
Yeah.
It's like it's a base of that. So my book, just to kind of briefly talk about it, it's really for the Vietnamese American person. When teaching virtual cooking classes during the pandemic, I taught a lot of Vietnamese dishes, and I realized I was like, no Vietnamese person is gonna pay to like come and teach, like learn from me. So many Vietnamese people did. And I was so touched by them because they were like, whether they didn't have their parents anymore, or they had a language barrier, or their parents just refused to teach them how to cook. They just wanted to connect with their heritage. And so I really felt like it was important that I made a book that was solely for the Vietnamese person, like using the ingredients that your mom uses, using MSG, like not whitewashing it, and like actually putting the actual like names of the dishes in Vietnamese so that they can learn. And so that's like my whole movement. Also, my mom's a manicurist. Like Vietnamese people have also been in the nail industry. So it's like seafood industry and nail industry is like what my family has really honed in on, like a lot of Vietnamese families here in America. And so it's like a celebration of Vietnamese culture.
So we're going to see your nails in the cookbooks is what you're saying.
Yeah, lots of nails, lots of nail art, highlighting like Vietnamese nail techs and a lot of food. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Awesome.
much for being with us today. Whenever your book comes out, please send us the links. We can put it in our show notes and everything. I know it's a year from now, but I'm really, really excited for this for you, and I'm glad that you exist.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is really fun.
I'm just excited to have talked to you, and I learned so much. And just think that we started about Tabasco sauce and now we're on like nails and Vietnamese food.
I'll always make it about me somehow. I'm just kidding.
Well, that's the point. That's why we asked.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway,
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Louise, for everything.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you,
It
Nini.
was so nice to meet y'all. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
We'll be in
Of course.
touch for sure. Thank you, Nini.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.